The Birch River Ledger. If you've ever felt the long pull of a small town, its kindness and its cruelties, this story is for you. Tonight, we go to the Ohio Valley, where a man in his late 50s opens a storage locker and finds not junk, but a reckoning. There will be love, there will be guilt, and there will be a ledger kept in a careful, shaking hand. Settle in, turn off the lights, and listen. Part 1. The Locker. On a drizzly Thursday in October, Michael Reed turned the key to Unit B-17 and let a gust of cold, concrete breath into his face. The locker smelled like damp cardboard and old oil, a scent he knew from the toll booth on Birch River Bridge where he'd once worked nights, counting coins, counting minutes, counting anything that would keep him from listening to his own thoughts. The locker wasn't his. It belonged to his brother, Aaron, who had died in a VA hospital 2 months earlier, the kind of quiet death men like Aaron are owed and almost never receive. A nurse with careful eyes had mailed Michael the key and a note. He said, "You'd know what to do." The handwriting had leaned forward as if it, too, were eager to be done with all of it. Inside, 3 milk crates of tapes, a shoebox labeled taxes, a folded canvas army cot, a fishing rod, a coffee can full of pennies, and at the very back, a ledger. Blue cloth cover, frayed corners, the kind of book that had belonged to careful people. Michael lifted it with both hands like an infant. On the first page, a date. September 23, 1987. On the second, a name written in pencil and pressed so hard the paper had bruised. Lila Hart. He felt the air leave his body like a door closing. He sat cross-legged on the cold floor and began to read. Each entry was a payment made to someone in town. Always cash, always the same amount, always on the 10th of the month. There were familiar names: Sheriff Rudd, Pastor Jonah Bell, Harlan Kincaid, who had owned the mill and most of what the mill touched, and one more, printed as if to hide, D. Reed, Diane, his ex-wife. From somewhere down the row of lockers, a radio mumbled a ball game. Somewhere else, a roll-up door clattered. Life continued with its cheerful noises, as it does when a man finds a doorway in the past and steps through. That night, Michael walked home the long way, past the diner that had changed hands 3 times and yet never changed, past the hardware store he now owned and the pharmacy that no longer filled the kind of prescriptions that had almost taken his brother. The bridge had been rebuilt, of course, after the collapse the year Lila died, the year the water took 6 lives and 1 secret. It rose now like a gray rib over the river, floodlights stitching it to the sky. He stood at the rail and watched the dark water carrying its private messages. When he finally turned from the river, a woman stood a few paces away, hands in her jacket pockets, eyes like slate under the street lamp. He knew her from the diner. May, who poured coffee with the tenderness some people reserve for prayer. She had a face that made you trust your own. She spoke as if she, too, had once worked a job where quiet was required and listening was everything. "You got something that used to belong to me," she said. Michael tightened his jaw. "I doubt that." "Blue ledger," she said softly, "and a voice you've been trying not to hear for 38 years. He did not move. He did not breathe. The river made its old sound against the pylons. Far away, a train took a slow curve with the patience of a sermon. Michael thought of the ledger, the names, the 10th of the month. Thought of the sheriff's signature like a brand, of Jonah Bell's tidy pastoral loops, of Diane's cramped, guilty cramped hand. Thought of Lila Hart, 17 that year, whose photo had lived in the high school hallway for 1 long season and then been taken down because it was too much. May waited, the way people do when they are sure the truth no longer owes them anything. "Who are you?" Michael asked. May smiled a private smile. "I was the girl they turned into a ghost," she said. "They didn't bury me. They shelved me." The rain began again, thin and steady. The bridge lights made a line of moons across the water. "Tomorrow," May said, stepping back into her own life. "Come to the diner before 6. Bring the ledger. If you want to keep sleeping, don't come." "Why me?" he asked, sounding angrier than he intended. "Because you were the one they chose to carry the weight," she said, and walked away. Michael stayed by the river until he could feel in his knees what the ledger had already told him. The past, even when buried, grows roots. Part 2. The Girl Who Lived. There are stories a town repeats until they turn into a smooth stone you can keep in your pocket and rub for courage. In Birch River, the story went like this: a faulty bearing, a misjudged truck, the midnight collapse of the old bridge, 6 dead, including a girl named Lila Hart who shouldn't have been out that late, and a part-time toll booth clerk named Michael Reed, who was the last to take her money. Grief and blame were traded like currency. The state came with clipboards. The mill promised better days. The pastor spoke about God's plan as if he'd seen the blueprint. And then people did what people do. They went back to work. They told the story until it hurt less. At 5:40 the next morning, Michael sat at the counter of May's diner with the ledger beside his coffee cup and his heart behaving like a bird that had trapped itself in a room. The diner was half full of men in hats and women in hoodies and a child in a school orchestra t-shirt whose mother had zoned him out with an iPad. The TV above the pies flickered with headlines that never reached the valley. The smell of bacon made a practical argument for living. May set a plate in front of him, the eggs done the way he always liked without having to ask. She didn't look at the ledger, not once. "They made a saint out of me," she said. "Worse, they made a cautionary tale. And you, they made into a shadow." "I never—" He stopped. The ledger sat there, a quiet thing with a loud heart. "I know," she said. "What is this?" He touched the blue cloth cover with a dread that was almost affection. "A record of the price of silence," May said. "Insurance against conscience. Your brother kept it. After the crash, Pastor Jonah and Sheriff Rudd needed someone they trusted to keep the clock wound. Aaron was good at 2 things, survival and loyalty. They used both. Michael tried to fit this into a shape he could stand. Aaron had come home from his war with a body that could not settle and a mind that had learned to live with empty rooms. He took jobs that ended suddenly. He loved women the way a man grabs a coat in a storm. He could keep a secret because he did not care for the noise confession makes. "I didn't die," May said as calmly as someone ordering toast. "I was meant to." That night on the bridge I'd been in Harlan Kincaid's office. He liked to say he mentored the girls who worked at the mill. You know what that meant. I had blood on my shirt that wasn't mine. I ran. Diane, your Diane, hit the brakes in time. I fell. The guardrail was rust and mercy. We saw the truck take the old bridge the way a tooth gives up its root. I crawled to the bank and hid under the pilings like a stray. Jonah found me, said God had given us a way out. For me, for the mill, for everyone. He said a funeral could wash a town. Michael closed his eyes. He saw Diane's hands on the wheel, small and furious. He saw Jonah with his Sunday face on a Tuesday, lifting a girl from the dark. He saw his brother accepting a task like a cigarette. He saw money moving in envelopes, always on the 10th. He saw himself counting coins in a booth, believing he could measure his guilt by the weight of state-issued quarters. "They put blood from the slaughterhouse on the broken rail," May said. "They tore a piece of my dress. They gave the river something to carry so they didn't have to. And I became May." "Why tell me now?" Michael asked, his voice rough with a habit of not being heard. "Because the mill is gone and Harlan is dying in a house that smells like orchids. Because your brother is dead. Because your son is angry in a way that has a fuse on it." She leaned in, lowering her voice until it had the intimacy of a whisper in a theater. "Because the ledger is a map and a match. And because I'm tired of pouring coffee for men who don't know they're thirsty." Michael thought of Nate, 29, a web of brilliant schemes and short contracts and sentences that began with, "The problem with you, Dad." He thought of the wrenching final argument that had ended with Nate saying, "All you ever did was take money for the bridge you helped kill," and the door closing with a logic Michael had no way to dispute. He thought of Leah, his older child, the quiet competence she wore like a jacket, the way she had put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Dad, we only get one story. Choose." What does he plan? Michael asked. May poured more coffee, a mothering gesture that did nothing to soften the fear. He thinks the town needs a spectacle to tell the truth. He thinks you and I had our chance and failed. Michael stared at the ledger. Every 10th, for 38 years. He recognized which months had been paid by Pastor Jonah, rounded handwriting that looked like it trusted itself, and which by the sheriff, truncated, angry. Diane's months were shaky, as if the pen had weighed more than it should. Take it, May said. It's yours or it's no one's. He picked up the ledger. He felt, absurdly, that he should say, Grace. When he looked up, a man stood in the doorway of the diner, cap low, jaw tense, a mania of purpose tightening his shoulders. Nate. Their eyes met. Something passed between them that would have a cost by sundown. Part 3. The pastor's house. By noon, the town had the kind of sky that takes olive color and makes it into worry. Michael drove with both hands at 10 and 2, the ledger on the passenger seat wrapped in an old towel, as if warmth could protect the past from drafts. He watched the rearview mirror the way a man watches a dog he knows will bite when he finally looks away. Nate's pickup kept a lawful distance, then darted into a turnoff. A game of follow that played without rules. He turned up the parsonage drive. Pastor Jonah Bell had the kind of house a certain righteousness builds. White clapboard with blue shutters, hydrangeas that performed obedience every June, a stoop that welcomed but did not encourage lingering. The bell at the church next door had rung marriages, funerals, wars, and the quiet nothing after each. Jonah opened the door before Michael knocked. He had a face that had made men confess things they would not admit to themselves. Age had not been unkind. He had kept his bearing and his barber. He looked at the towel in Michael's hands and did not pretend not to know. I wondered when the 10th would come to collect, he said. Michael brushed past him into the foyer, into the smell of lemon cleaner and something like sorrow. Your money's late, he said, and dropped the ledger on a hall table. Jonah's mouth did a slow, private calculation. Aaron kept it. My brother kept what he was told to keep, Michael said. He took a step toward Jonah and regretted it immediately, the way a man regrets stepping on ice. You told me I killed a girl with inattention. You used my grief like a tool. Jonah's eyes narrowed in a way that made clear he felt the same pain, or had learned to display it. We saved a life, he said, maybe 2. That night would have devoured Lila any way it could. We forestalled the cruelest mouth. You bought silence, and you kept buying it because you like the quiet. Jonah lifted his hands in a gesture that had blessed 1,000 pies and babies. You want confession? All right, I was weak. There was the mill, there was the town, there was Lila. She was not ready to withstand the storm. There was Diane. She was already part of it. The lie was a raft. I was a fool to think we'd ever reach shore. Michael's tongue felt like a dry rag. Why Diane's name in your careful ledger? Jonah flinched, then recovered. Some truths a man prepares for, others land on his lot like a meteor. Because she knew. Because the lie needed more than one witness to stand. Because she... He stopped. He looked at Michael the way a doctor looks at a chart that contains more than medicine. Because, once, after, she came to me in the dark of the sanctuary and asked if God could forgive a woman for loving the wrong man at the wrong time. The foyer went quiet in a way the body does just before it faints. Michael clenched his teeth hard enough to see light. Say it plain, he rasped. Jonah wrapped his hands together, a man in prayer or handcuffs. Your son, Nate. He believes the past owes him a theater. He thinks if he lights the stage bright enough, the truth will be clean. I think he will destroy what he wants to purify. Michael leaned on the table. The ledger's cloth rasped under his palm. You're changing the subject. I am not, Jonah said softly. I am telling you what the subject has always been. The front window shook with the force of a truck door slamming. Nate's voice tore across the yard. You going to keep hiding, old man? You going to keep blessing your own cowardice?" Jonah closed his eyes for the length of a single breath. "He will hurt someone," he said, "and think himself righteous for it." Michael walked to the door. "Then we don't let him," he said, and for the first time in years felt a clean, terrible purpose enter his bones. He turned back. "One more question. Whose idea was the ledger?" Jonah glanced at the towel-wrapped book, and something, the last plank in an old structure, gave way in his face. "Harlan's," he said. "He believed in records. He said someday the right person would read them and be grateful." "He was wrong," Michael said. "Nobody is grateful for an accurate account of a lie." When he stepped outside, the sky had lowered to the height of a bad promise. Nate stood by the pickup, a tangle of anger and brilliance. He had his mother's mouth and Michael's stubbornness. He looked at the towel in Michael's hands and smirked. "Finally," Nate said. "Evidence." "It's not dynamite," Michael said. "Everything is dynamite if you bring a match," Nate replied. "Where are you headed?" Michael asked, though he knew. "Same place you always go when you can't stand what you've done," Nate said. The bridge. Part 4. Harlan's Orchids. There are houses that train silence the way men train dogs. Harlan Kincaid's modern mansion on the hill had that silence, temperate, obedient. The nurse opened the door with the compassionate impatience of a woman who had rung these bells for years. She looked at Michael's towel and saw through it. She looked at Nate's jaw and made a private note. "He's in the conservatory," she said. "Smells like a honeymoon and a funeral." The orchids were in bloom with indecent confidence, every color a kind of brag. Harlan sat in a wicker chair, a blanket on his knees, though the room was warm. He was a man who had once made entire payrolls happen with a phone call, and now had to summon his breath like a shy guest. "You brought the book," he said. "Good. It likes to be near me." "It belongs to no one," Michael said, "which is to say it belongs to everyone." Harlan smiled with the radiance the dying sometimes allow themselves. "The ledger was my compromise with conscience. I have no illusions. It did not repay the debt, but it kept me from believing I was better than I was." "You kept us all from being better," Nate said, stepping forward. "You tied us to your crimes and called it community." Harlan looked at him with interest as if he had hired him once. "You must be the boy with the excellent grades and the temper to match." "I'm the boy who's going to set the record straight," Nate said. "The state inspector comes through next week. I'll make sure he has more than measurements." "Records will not save you," Harlan said gently. "The truth will not save you either. Only mercy can do that, and it is a rare bird." "Mercy keeps the powerful in their chairs," Nate spat. "Sometimes," Harlan said, "sometimes it lets a girl live long enough to become the woman who serves your father as eggs." Michael felt the room tilt. "You know, May is Lila." "Of course," Harlan said. "I paid for her first apartment. A decent sin, as they go. I had done more indecent things." Nate laughed without humor. "Listen to the philosopher of orchids." Harlan coughed, a wet, small sound. The nurse appeared with a glass of water like a miracle timed for the third act. "There's a bag by the door," Harlan said to Michael. "Aaron left it. He said one day you would find the courage to accept the difference between blame and responsibility." Michael found the bag, a canvas satchel with army stenciling, heavy in the way objects are when they carry more than their own weight. Inside was a cassette recorder decades out of fashion and a single tape labeled in Aaron's block letters, OCT 87, QNF. Back in the conservatory, Michael set the recorder on a table among the orchids and pressed play. Aaron's voice filled the air, flat and patient, the way a man speaks when he knows the machine is the only witness he trusts. "October 10th, Aaron said. "They came one at a time, the men who never stood in line for anything else. The pastor first. Said the girl's alive and needs a new name. Said the town needs a dead girl more than a scandal. Sheriff came with a manila envelope. Said the mill can't take another blow, not with the bridge gone. Then Diane. She cried without sound. Said she'd have killed the girl if not for Jonah. Said Michael doesn't need to carry more weight. Harlan came last. Said the ledger is my insurance and theirs. Said every month, the 10th, they pay. Said someday, the right person will read this and choose. The tape clicked as if it, too, had a heartbeat. Aaron spoke again, softer, as if speaking to his brother across an impossible distance. Mike, if you ever hear this, know you didn't kill anybody. You were the easiest door to lean a lie against, that's all. The bridge fell because the mill cut corners for years, and a night shift takes whatever you give it. Lila lived because Diane braked in time. The money bought fewer nightmares, not absolution. When you find the book, decide whether the town needs fire or light. Michael pressed stop. The orchids watched with their idiot beauty. Nate looked at his father and saw not a man to be toppled, but a man holding a bag of burning consequences. He turned on his heel and strode toward the door. "Where are you going?" Michael called. "To light the sky," Nate said. "If the truth looks like fireworks, maybe people will finally look up." The house's silence swallowed the echo of the door slamming. Outside, the sky had darkened to the green of a bruise that is about to reveal its color. The river below, unseen but constant, rehearsed its old argument with the shore. Harlan shifted in his chair with a wince. "If you go after him to stop him," he said, "remember you cannot stop a fuse with a lecture." Michael put the recorder in the satchel, the ledger under his arm. "What stops a fuse?" he asked. "Water," Harlan said simply, "or a hand willing to burn." Part 5. The Bridge and the River. The new Birch River Bridge glowed under the emergency lights like bone under skin. Patrol cars had arranged themselves at both ends, their strobes writing a poem in red and blue that no one wanted to read. A small crowd made the sound towns make when they have gathered for tragedy. A hush you could wear. The sheriff, older, heavier, held a bullhorn that looked too modern for him. Pastor Jonah prayed with anyone who would take his hand, his face a practiced map of sorrow. May stood at the guardrail, eyes fixed on the midspan. She did not tremble. She had used up her trembling long ago. Michael parked on the shoulder and walked onto the bridge with the calm of a man who had no other place to be. He carried the satchel. He carried the ledger. He carried a knowledge that had changed its weight 3 times since dawn. Halfway up the rise, he saw Nate hunched by the rail, a backpack by his feet, a wire poking its nervous tail from the zipper. He had always been good with circuits. He had always believed electricity deserved purpose. "Don't," Michael said without raising his voice. Nate did not turn. "Call it off, Dad." "It was called off in 1987, Michael said. "We are here to call it on. Truth, not spectacle." "I tried truth," Nate said. People clasped their hands and said, "Hush now, the Lord is listening." They prefer a lie with manners. Michael lowered the satchel. "Your uncle left you a message." He took the recorder and set it gently on the concrete as if it were something alive. He pressed play. Aaron's voice came, unromantic and unafraid. Nate listened because the dead have a way of commanding a room. When the tape clicked to its end, the bridge felt suddenly more solid, as if belief had been added to its materials. "Water or a hand?" Michael said softly. "Those are the tools." Nate looked at the backpack. "You always told me not to touch what wasn't mine." "I was wrong," Michael said. "Touch what can save someone." They stood in a quiet that belonged only to them. Nate knelt. His hands moved with the speed of someone who respects danger. He pulled the battery lead. The wire fell slack with a petulant sigh. He exhaled, a man who had mistaken rage for mission and found his way back with seconds to spare. Sheriff Rudd, slow to believe any story he didn't write, strode up with the bullhorn and a mouthful of law. Michael raised his hands. "It's finished," he said, and for once the sentence was both true and merciful. May approached from the shadows with the stillness of someone who had learned not to startle a lie. She touched Nate's shoulder as carefully as if there were another wire there. "You don't owe us a show," she said. "You owe yourself a morning." Pastor Jonah, breathless, arrived in time to hear the end and miss the heart. "The Lord," he began. "No," Michael said, with a tenderness that surprised even him. "Tonight, the river saved us. Tomorrow, you can have your say." He opened the ledger and held it out like a birth certificate. "This is the price of our quiet," he said to the sheriff, to the pastor, to the crowd that had gathered to be changed and would go home uncomfortably the same. "We paid it for 38 years, no more." Sheriff Rudd took the book with the reluctance of a man taking a child he knows is not his. "Evidence," he muttered, and the word felt both too big and too small. From the east, thunder stitched the horizon. The first drops of rain arrived in a scatter, the way apologies do. Michael slung the satchel over his shoulder and looked at his son. "Let's go home," he said, and Nate nodded in a way that contained an entire childhood of almost. On the far end of the bridge, near the commemorative plaque that listed the names that were and the one that wasn't, Harlan's nurse stood under an umbrella. She had the look of a woman who knows what morphine can and cannot do. She held a small envelope. "Mr. Kincaid asked me to bring this," she said. Inside was a check, not blood money, not absolution, but a gift scribbled with a trembling hand to cover the diner's mortgage twice over. On the memo line, "For the life that costs what it costs." May read it with a careful face. Then she folded it and put it in Michael's shirt pocket. "Give it to Leah," she said. "She'll know what to do. She always has." Nate laughed, not bitter this time. "You always loved her best," he said. "I loved you both," Michael said. "The ledger doesn't measure that kind of thing." They walked off the bridge together while the town sorted itself into opinions. By the time they reached the truck, the rain had decided to be rain. It washed the dust from the guardrail. It rinsed the plaque. It made the river smell like itself. That night, in Michael's kitchen, the tape recorder on the table between them like an extra guest, they ate the kind of soup you make when you do not know what else to do. Diane came by, not to be forgiven or to forgive, but to bring cornbread and a look that said she had kept herself alive and meant to continue. She touched Nate's hair as he bent over the bowl, and the gesture told 3 decades without a single adjective. Later, after the dishes, after the first tentative jokes that feel like testing the ice, May stepped onto the porch with a cup of tea. She did not ask for anything. She did not need to. The town, finally, had begun to speak in complete sentences. Michael sat beside her. In the distance, the bridge held. The river made the sound of a promise it had learned not to break. "Do you think it's over?" May asked. "No," he said, "but I think it's ours now." And because the old story had taken so much from them, they began carefully to tell a new one. If this story found you, if it stirred something you'd been keeping quiet, tap the like button so it can find others. Share your thoughts in the comments. What should a town choose when the truth is heavier than it looks? And if stories like this give you a place to breathe, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. More is on the way.